Hello, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to see the full house like this. Today for the second lecture for the Graphic Elisava series, we have Peter Biľak, but today it's gonna be Laura who's gonna introduce him.
That's so funny. Is it working? Yes. Thank you, my beloved students. I love you. This is a very nice welcome. Come on. Oh my God. No. Okay, I'm going to be very short because Peter has to talk, and because I don't want to talk too much, I wrote what I'm going to read. So it's easy. Peter Biľak. Hola a todos. Benvinguts, benvingudes. Gracias por estar aquí. Thank you for coming to Elisava today. It's for me a great pleasure to introduce Peter Biľak, my friend, later my teacher, and always my very much admired designer. Born in Bratislava, Peter lives in The Hague, and is a graphic and a type designer there, where he also teaches at Typemedia at the KBK, and he was the co-founder of Dot magazine. He launched Work, and he's behind the Type Foundry Typotech, as well as Phone-Stand, a phone rental platform. For all this, I could say Peter is a true design entrepreneur. Something that, when English, you can learn words from using it and just invent it. Maybe it's not correct, whatever. And a man of great foresight. So the title of his talk is Giving Voice to People. Let's welcome Peter.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm on, right? You hear me? Okay, very good. All right, thank you, Laura. I wish you'd be on stage all the time. We'd get like a lot more interest. Okay, I'm glad to be here. I don't know if you realize this is the third attempt to organize this. I was invited years ago, it didn't work out. Then the second time 3 years ago, and then just at the start of pandemics was canceled. So hopefully now it's going to work out. I'm here. And I was just thinking about it this morning that if I would have been here as planned in March 2020, it would be a completely different presentation, completely different focus, completely different work. Our work has changed dramatically during the pandemic, I think as everyone else's. At that time, we were really busy with performance projects, working with theaters, live audiences. Of course, all that stopped. And the pandemic kind of gave us a focus, really work a lot more with research, which is something I'll be talking about, and going more in depth in things because suddenly the travels was no longer available, no longer possible. So it was not what we imagined, but we're trying to make best out of it. I'll be speaking a lot in plural. I'll be talking, we made this, we made that. It's not that I'm modest. I'm speaking in behalf of more people. So our company has grown, and we work with more people. And this is not even all. I'm missing, I don't know, is Hector here? Hector's here, so I'm missing Hector in the back row. Like he should be on the pictures, but somehow we didn't get you in the class. Has joined us last year, and now he's based in Barcelona, so we have a connection to the city. Kevin is not here on the picture, who I'll be speaking about his work, but the others are here. And so indeed, it is almost all our work is collaborations. It's multiple people. I don't remember doing anything by myself in the last 15 years, to be honest. So there's a lot of exchange. And you have to learn, this was, I have to say, a learning lesson, how to work with other people, how not to expect that people will do exactly what I do, and how to create space for people. And it leads to better results. I think the work is better now than it has been before. But also start with very old work. This is the oldest, this is the oldest work that I have, before, that I've rescued from all the files. To see how the work was, how it was 25 years ago, something like this, which led me to all the questions about what are we doing? Because I think that at that time when I was working with posters and books and exhibitions, I think my biggest frustration was that I always thought that I got involved in the work too late. And there was not much room to make any changes, real substantial changes. And because graphic design is pretty much a surface-based discipline. So you get involved towards the end, not at the beginning. There are reasons for this, which led to thinking about what is design, how it should work. Is there room for authorship, or how to operate in this business? And after all doing this, we started a magazine called Dot 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 together with Stuart Bailey, and ended with David Ranford. I was involved for the most part, lasted 10 years. And the question was this, what is graphic design? Why is it important? Does it have any limits, what we do? Because it is a discipline when we become temporary experts on many different things. At least we think so. So if you work with architecture, you have to kind of learn a bit about architecture. If you work with, I don't know, medical journal, you have to learn a lot about something else. But I think questioning authorship was very much in vogue 20 years ago. There were discussions about this. If design contains authorship, if the form is an element of content, and because changing form affects the content, affects the message. And it has been explored in this magazine. At a time when most of design publications were either very portfolio-based, and there was hardly anything to read, or you had very academic journals, and they didn't really care about how they look like, and they didn't really care about proving things with design. So we started something which we took both images and words and layouts seriously, and we would experiment with all of it. Again, it would be a separate talk. I'm not going to talk about it. It just shows trajectory, where it came from, and how, when I start talking about the current work, so you see the roots, because there's always a path. And many paths are, they are shaped by coincidences, by people you meet, by anything that happens around you. And this was an important step, in understanding how publishing works. And from this, which was examining what graphic design is, a second question came later after completing this, and I was thinking I'll never work with magazines because it was complicated, saying the least. I started thinking again, having 3 years break, I didn't do anything. Then I was like, okay, so what is it? Kind of the bigger questions, how design works. How do you define again? It was a basic thing. You meet people, they ask you, what do you do? And you're trying to explain in human terms what we do. What is the value of doing it? Not just describing a label, because the label doesn't explain it, but explaining how it benefits society, how it benefits some people. And if I say design, people always assume I'm a fashion designer, and I'm not. So, back in school, when I went to school, my teachers were often using this phrase. I don't know, it's quite dated. I don't think it's a good definition, but it offers, it's a very problematic definition at saying the least, but it offers at least suggestion of that it's not really about just appearances, but it's about the inner workings. So at least there's something suggestion of this. It is, Thomas Watson was not a designer. He was head of IBM at the time. So he was making a relationship between the client and design, or the business and design. Again, I think it's problematic because we see plenty of examples of really bad businesses doing great design, and vice versa. Great companies having terrible design. So having the two of them on the same level is actually quite rare. But it opens up questions about what design is. And again. Many people have idea, again, probably not here, because this is all kind of the inside of the bubble. But if you would ask on the street what design is, they think of these unusual, beautiful things. This is a design chair, and you buy it probably in a design shop, not in a normal shop, and it probably costs a lot of money. It's probably made by a designer with who's exhibited in museums, who was studying design schools, and some designers sit on it. So it works in isolation. And then the question is what is this? It performs similar function. I would probably say it's maybe more comfortable than the other one, if you compare functionally, they're similar, but of course they mean different things. So again, there's an idea that design is very elitist, everyday things are not, and the elitism distinguishes professional designers from the lay people. This has been my my brother's an engineer who has no interest in design, and he always kind of joke about this, that everything which I buy are useless, things which are overpriced and they are design objects, and he cares more about something else. And it led to another project. So the project was Works at Work, a magazine that we published for 5 years this time, reducing it deliberately, and it was designed to last 5 years. It was designed to have 10 issues. I'm not showing all of them. Published twice a year, same format. And I'll mention just one story from the magazine to explain how not every design needs to be kind of obsessed with surface and only. I mean, the magazine itself has interesting stories. I'm not going to talk about it. It has, it tried to explore, the principles of how things operate, distribution, funding, like anything else, because these are very important things which shape designs. I think anyone who's here who practices designs realizes that money affects it, and conditions, how we operate affects it. And so there is an interesting backstory about that once you change the model of publishing, everything changes completely. Suddenly, where you sell it, how you sell it, how it's available, who is reading it, it will be completely different. But it's a different story. I'm not going to talk about it. I'll only mention that what this project sets to examine, and again, that's all kind of the preparation, what I'm going to talk about later, is talking about the impact. So not talking about promise, what things should do, but talking about the actual impact, like how things work. And we could only talk about impact when the magazine would not be focused on the most recent thing, what media does. Media always reports on the latest, very latest things. That doesn't allow talking about the impact, because you only see what people say, like, this should be doing this is a great idea, this is a new innovative thing, but you don't really see what happens with it 5 years later, 10 years later. Does it affect people's life? Does it make any change in this world at all? So we're looking at mundane objects. So rather than celebrating designers, we're looking just like ideas, objects. Object like this, half of people will recognize it. Half people hopefully never seen this in men's bathrooms. It's the and there's this thing that's in Amsterdam airport. There's an image of a fly, which the placement of the image of the fly improves people's lives because it saves cleaning costs by 80% apparently, because men are so simple that they need to aim for things, and once you do that, the cleaning costs are eliminated. So you can talk about how not how it looks, but what it does. And so what we did with magazines, that we would go to places which are often ignored from discussions about design, because we have this idea that design happens in London and in Milano and in Stockholm and nowhere else. And so there is a center and there's a periphery. So we often look at these peripheries and seeing that there are incredible examples of design that should be discussed. And one thing that we traveled to Bhutan and spent a number of weeks there. I keep researching about postage stamps, and it started with this. This is the first Bhutanese postage stamp. I mean, it's not remarkable, so the design by itself is not something that would deserve attention. I think the only thing that deserves attention is that if you look at neighboring countries, almost none of them exist. So Sikkim as a country doesn't exist, and Tibet doesn't exist as an independent country. Only India does, and Eastern Pakistan doesn't exist. So they're all changed. And that was the reason, why we're there, is that this was kind of quite a turbulent area. So Sikkim was annexed by India, Tibet was annexed by China, and Bhutan always felt like it was going to be the next one country to be annexed by big countries, China or India. And they needed funding, they needed money to make their point that they are independent country to be recognized. So they wanted to achieve recognition with minimum money, and also wanted to, they applied for funding from the World Bank, and it was rejected because China and India blocked it. So with no money with no possibility to find the funding, they invented, I find, ingenious scheme to raise funds for development of the country. And the scheme was that they start selling postage stamps in a time when they had no postal services. So you could buy a stamp, you couldn't use it. So it means all the money was just profit for the state of Bhutan. And when they started, it was very simple like this, but they realized because those stamps were intended not for the inside of the country, but from outside, they had to appeal to audience. So suddenly they had to think like designers, what appeals to masses? So this is, we're talking about late 60s, early 70s. So after this, Bhutanese stamps look like this. This is stamps in 1969. First lenticular postage stamps in the world coming from Bhutan, celebrating people and space travel. Quite remarkable. The first postage stamps printed on silk come from Bhutan. First stamps printed on foil come from Bhutan. First 3D stamps come from Bhutan. So what is this? Of course, it's a postage stamp. It's a mini LP. It's this size. It features a song, national anthem of Bhutan. So you could get the letter, and you could clip it and put it on a record player, and it would tell you. There's a number of them. There's one where King gives the introduction to the country. There's a national song. Incredible, and what this managed to achieve, suddenly, this became collector's item. So postage stamps. Hello, Maria. These postage stamps were so successful that people learned about the new country, so achieved actually what this was meant to be. And by the mid 70s, 30% of the country's GDP was generated by selling postage stamps. So design allowed building roads, allowed building actual post offices, so could finally send letters using these stamps, which was not possible before, and funded schools and infrastructure, which is, again, not just good looking, but the impact of this was massive for small country. And we would write stories about this, and I think this became inspiration for myself about, always aiming to do something that, of course, it should look good. I think that's the minimum, but hopefully there is a model, a win-win model for everyone. That you're not doing something at the expense of someone, but creating some model that allows, growth. Okay, but the work I'm going to talk about from now on, this was just a pretext, is concerned with text. So I mentioned that we publish things. So we see ourselves, Typotech, Tipotech. We are pretty much a publishing company. We publish all kinds of things, mainly fonts, but we also publish all kinds of other objects. And we focus with text. Text is the root of our work. We had experience with editing, publishing, working with text. But of course, text is also something else. It can be seen visually, and this is another focus of our work, that we work with type design, with typography. That it's not just something to, not a container of information alone. It also, communicates something on a different level. And the usual comparison is that type works like voice, and it materializes speech, and without it, it would not be really permanent. So we design fonts. This is a number of fonts we've designed until now. And my personal fascination with type is, of course, that this is an image of a Polyglot Bible from Antwerp, from the Planten Museum, Planten Printers, which is a 6-language version. And an interesting thing was to consider how different languages coexist next to each other. If you look, so this is Hebrew, and this is Latin, and there's Greek. There should be something else. I'm not seeing it. I really like how these old books look like, because they're all doing their own things. The Greek is dancing its own dance and not caring about the Latin, and the Hebrew is much bigger because not using vowels. The text is usually much shorter. So they wouldn't care. They would just scale it and make it much bigger. So it has its own character because the reader would just read one thing. This is admirable, but of course today, when we work with multiple languages and multiple writing scripts, the question is how should it work? Because that time there were no lights and bolts, and you didn't have to think systematically. Today we actually do have to. And for longest time, this was the state of typography. So this is from 1500. This is a font from 1998, Arial Unicode. Arial Unicode was the first font which was able to glue or support various writing scripts at the same time. And you would expect that it would be consistent, but except it was really collage. So this is Arial, as you know. This is Armenian, this is Devanagari, this is Tamil, and this is Gurmukhi. You see like a Tamil is slanted, and this is high contrast, so kind of serif-like. This is really small. So if you would type messages, you would get many different voices. You get this cacophony of voices. It's not one voice. And the question is like, is it possible to create one voice of a type across different cultures? It's not easy because there are different traditions to respect, different things to consider, completely different developments. And often it looks like this. In the old days, it was not a problem, but today, this was design manual of Philips. This is how Philips' logo was transliterated and translated to different scripts. This is in the 80s. So in the 80s, Philips appeared completely differently in every country. It didn't have any way to control its appearance without sophistication, about what it's trying to project, what it's trying to do. Often there are all these mission statements about what companies are very particular about the expression. Here the expression is pretty much random. We could find this font in Cyrillic, so we use it. We didn't find, we found something else in different script, and so we use something else. So it looks pretty careless. And of course today we work in a time when you can have your phone and you can change the language and expect that visual hierarchy is preserved by changing the language. Change of language can mean that you change the writing script as well. And so there is a clear hierarchy of text of thick and thins and big and small. So it needs to be preserved, which means that some things need to be consistent in order to allow it to make it work. So this is what we do these days. We create very complicated type systems that allow, this is work for Paris Underground, Paris Metro, which is it's a work in development. It's the longest project we've been working on. We worked on it for 10 years, and we should be working on it another 10 years because there are 86 new stations being built, and we're working with the Parisian studio, with Rudy Bar Integral on this new signage, developing new fonts for Arabic, Chinese, Latin. And the question is that you have to, if you choose to support these languages, they need to be supported in a way which are respectful, because type is providing a lot more than just content. It is providing you the voice, and it's not just a matter of translation. So a lot of what we do is trying to preserve the diversity that exists rather than unifying it. And we create fonts that come with different writing scripts. These are some of the recent releases, this one or that one. This will be coming out soon, which is exciting for Japanese, Chinese, Korean. So we work, there's about 7,000 languages in the world right now, written in about 200 different writing scripts. And another 200 writing scripts are not yet encoded. They're not part of Unicode. We cannot even design fonts for. And most of those languages and writing scripts will disappear. I'll be talking about it in a bit. So right now we're busy with, this is the current work that what we're dealing with. And what we find important is that, yes, Chinese is important because it's a massive language spoken by a billion people. Hindi, Devanagari is important, but also, this language spoken only by 1 million people is no less important, than something else. So the measure is not just number of people. The measure is not just GDP. The measure is not just the economic measure. There's something else which is immeasurable, which is the cultural impact. And we made a choice that that we split the resources that we have, and we work with small or big languages because it is our cultural responsibility. So what I mentioned, that the estimations are that from the 7,000 languages which are recognized today, it's about 700 to 152, according to the recent estimates. The positive trend, the positive estimation is that half of them will disappear by the end of the century. And the negative ones, saying that up to 90% of them will disappear. And a lot have to do with, and this is compared to biodiversity, something which takes millennia to develop, and only very short time to disappear. And usually that loss is irreversible. It is one way. And by losing a language, you lose access to information, which is not translatable to other places. There's a lot of medicinal knowledge or botanical knowledge which is available only in single language. And by losing it, we just lose not just language, we lose knowledge. There's a small movie I want to show how small countries deal with this.
This is Iceland's language planning department, a small group of scholars who create the words that Icelanders will need to navigate the future.
This is really the battlefield, because if we lose important fields, people start to look at the language as not complete, and then it starts to become just a hobby or something. And
English loanwords dominate conversations around the world, especially when it comes to fields like finance and technology. To stop Icelanders from depending on English, the language planning department works with dozens of specialized committees to invent terms for everything from medical conditions to foreign foods. So the words that you should not use, these are derived from outside the word,
Danish or something.
like canvas, keepers. Okay.
Oh, pure enough. Okay.
Right. Contemporary Icelandic is nearly identical to the language of the Icelandic sagas, written more than 1,000 years ago. And one way committees create new words is by combining ancient Viking words such as volva, meaning prophetess, and tala, which means number.
From these two words, he made the word tölva for computer.
The campaign to keep Icelandic pure is working. Icelanders do use tölva for computer, along with the Icelandic words for emoji and artificial intelligence. But for a language to thrive in the digital age, machines need to speak it too. Few tech companies are willing to invest in a language spoken by only 320,000 people. So Siri and Alexa, for example, don't offer an Icelandic option.
The problems here is that it's nearly as expensive to make it for the Icelandic language as for English. So it costs a lot.
Iceland's Ministry of Education has budgeted more than $20 million to create an Icelandic language database. Their goal is to make it free for any company to incorporate Icelandic into their products anywhere in the world.
The government really made a 5-year plan, I think, and put rather large funds into this to make this possible for Icelandic. So hopefully we are not too late.
Icelanders worry that the youngest generation has less and less use for their native language.
So how old are you guys?
12.
You guys speak English?
Yes.
How did you learn English?
School and the internet. Watching.
What are you watching on YouTube? Minecraft?
I don't actually watch YouTube. I just watch like Netflix, Friends.
You watch Friends on Netflix?
Yeah.
And it's all in English?
Yeah.
You can't watch it in Icelandic?
No, there's nothing that exists called Friends in Icelandic.
The impact of technology and digital tools has sort of cut both ways.
This is Ross Perlin, co-director of the Endangered Language Alliance, a New York City nonprofit that documents and describes languages, some so endangered they're spoken by fewer than 1,000 people.
Larger languages are further strengthened by all the kind of digital tools that stand behind them, but at the same time, there are spaces online for smaller languages.
Almost half of the world's 7,000 languages are at risk of extinction. Losing them means losing more than just words.
From a scientific point of view, from a linguistic point of view, just undeniably, there's an incredible amount of knowledge about history, the world, ecology, plants, animals, I mean, life-saving, critical information that is encoded and is in these languages and can't and shouldn't be just extracted surgically.
Icelandic benefits from a long literary history and a wealthy national government that considers the construction and maintenance of Icelandic words as important as the construction and maintenance of Icelandic roads.
Ég held að uppáhaldsorðið mitt sé sauðljóst. Það merkir eiginlega að það sé orðið bjart til að þú geti greint kind í fáeinna faðma fjarlægð.
But Icelanders have realized that if they want their language to survive, they have to reach beyond their borders and make sure they're part of the digital conversation too.
Right. Well, people are clever, and usually they look for information whatever is available, and because theory that would not work with some marginalized languages, people stop using languages because they want to benefit from all the benefits that your phone offers. This is one of the reasons we are engaged with small and large languages, and I'll show you some examples, like how the work on dominant languages funds the work on small ones. For example, this one. So this is a language called Santali in India, which is it's an alphabetic script, which is a rarity in India because most of scripts in India are syllabus based. This one is phonetic, alphabetic. The problem with working with these languages is that there is not enough knowledge to know how to design fonts for it. There's no book, there's no manual, there's no like a resource, online resource that you can go to and consult. So the only way to do it is to go and meet the people. So it requires field trips, not an easiest way to organize it. So that's what we would do. We would organize a number of field trips to northeast of India to speak and to understand how these languages work, how they operate. And in collaboration with locals, we could then define fonts and try to kind of see what was problematic before. I'll be talking about that collaboration in other projects. It's not easy even for large languages. The largest language spoken in India is Hindi. Often people mistaken it for national language. There's no national language in India. There's not even a known number of languages spoken in India. The estimates of hundreds, or possibly thousands of languages spoken in India. The last census of India reported 1,700 languages spoken in India. So it's a huge number. And Hindi is spoken only about a third, so about 30% of the country. We develop Hindi fonts, Devanagari fonts, because it's the biggest script that for entire India. But often we would struggle with understanding that the shapes of letters on different places where Devanagari script is used are different. In the same way how, I don't know, in Europe, we would, 500 years ago, the books in Germany would look different than books published in Italy. Using the same letters, but having clear preference for some other forms. So today, when someone from Nepal, from Kathmandu, would ask me, do your fonts support Nepali? I would struggle. I would say, well, it will not miss letters, but we don't know if the letters look the way how Nepali readers want them to look. And we don't know how to check. So the only way to do it was that we decided, okay, I guess we need to find out ourselves. Because there was no, again, reliable resource that would allow us to make this choice. So what we did in a starting point would be analyzing printed books, anything made in the last 100 years, to see what are the preferences, what has been made, across entire country. And collecting these different shapes, often to understand where it comes from. And once we collected the database of shapes, then we would devise them, and you look at the same letter, basic vowel A can have two different forms. Often it's considered to be a Bombay form or Calcutta forms from two different regions, but sometimes we don't understand. Is it a regional preference? Why there are two different forms? And these are numbers. Again, they are wildly different. And sometimes people say, well, I can read this one, I cannot read that one. Someone else would say the opposite. So it would be very hard to find consensus on, we want to support it, we want to do a proper job, except we don't understand what needs to be done. And There's no, again, resource that would allow us to make informed decision about it. And that's why, again, we decided to, well, make a survey first. The only way to find out information is to ask people and ask a sufficient number of people. So it would be survey online and in person of interviewing hundreds of people across India. Now this is why Hector is important, because Hector was running. So Hector is not a designer. He has interest in design, strong interest in design, but his training is in psychology, in cognitive psychology, and which includes partly working with statistics and statistical information. Hector would help us to design a questionnaire, or well, you are involved in doing it, when we would define questions about recognition, preference, education, and try to, we would develop forms where people would choose, like which one do you recognize, which one do you taught to learn, and we would look for patterns of, how these different things relate to age and education and the first language and the other language which is spoken. And if you look, you will find patterns. It's not simple, so again, we're relying on Hector to crack the data, working with Excel sheets, but also statistical information to find the correlations between the graphic shapes, what we do, and why they're favored by some people. To be honest, I didn't know how to read these graphs before. Hector taught me how to read it, and it shows you that how age affects the preferences. And how you can clearly see that the older the reader, the more have a preference for certain forms, and two different forms of for example, of this numeral. You would see how, depending where people went to school, they would have different expectations about which numbers they read. We would see well, same with letters. We could break it down to places. And also see how the first language which they were learned to speak again affects what they learn later prefer to read. This is all very useful and would allow us to gather total number of how recognition works, and to create recommendations not just for us but also for others, anyone who's interested working in India, to see okay, this is the guidelines. Which explains which forms are preferable under which conditions, because they all come with what are the recommendations, what are acceptable shapes, what are conditionally preferable depending on region or age of people. I wish something like this existed so we could use it, but not finding it, we realized that it is our responsibility to step in and to do this research, to do our work properly, because otherwise we would just repeat, faulty information and disseminate them, without understanding how these shapes should look like. So now we're pretty certain that the fonts we produce for India, for example, for Devanagari, we create specific versions for the different regions, and we've tested it, knowing how they work. All of this is published online. It's open source knowledge, because we believe that this is also important. That this is not something that one should keep, but only the reason why society moves forward is because we benefit from and we accumulate knowledge on top of each other. I'll be speaking more about research, but I don't want to make it too serious, because it then sounds like we all working in a lab all day. We at the end are designers. And we do all kind of funny things as well. We sketch, we work with clients, we work without clients, we work because we like type. And some things we don't really need serious investigations. We investigate technologies, and we build typefaces which come with behavior that things can react to each other. This is work by Nikola Jurek.
Baby, please don't go.
Type specimen.
Baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't
And the typeface is just programmed to, this is animated in text editor. It's just typing text. This would happen. Because the knowledge behavior is in the font itself.
Babe, I'm way down here in a roll-on fog. Baby, please don't go.
And there's no, like a large concept in it. It's playful, it's funny. We believe that, type can behave and be contextual, because I think the best type is when, you connect context with information. There's another project like this, when, again by Nicola Jurek, like a collaborator, partner, that, again, by typing, by contextual features, things can work differently, and you behave, you build different behaviors in a typeface. This typeface, which is called Francis, we recently been using it for the record of for the logo of Grammy. Grammy has this. They probably changed it. They have an animated version of the logo, which is responding to sound. So it is contextual again now by listening to music and behaving accordingly, interpreting tonality. Type can do a lot of things. We usually work with type because it establishes an identity. We saw it with, here it is the corporate identity. Working with marginalized languages, it is the true identity of people, which is established by using language and type. But yeah, again, simple idea, and we do these things, often it sounds like simple things. What happens if you do that? It's just exploration, and often when you push it far enough, you can discover something possibly novel. A lot of our work is also we do custom typefaces. People always think that we have an incredible number of fonts available on the market, and it's true. There are hundreds of thousands of fonts. Yet, still, people come with new needs for new language and for new typefaces. We do most of our work is across complex scripts that we work with for companies which need to support 10 different writing scripts and combine it. So that's a typical request. But this is a simpler request, and I brought it to show that even within Latin, there are needs for This project was, we finished it last year for Norwegian broadcasting company. NRK is the public national TV, radio, news channel of Norway, which reaches 99% of Norwegian population. So basically, it's near monopoly in Norway. Everyone reads it, everyone sees it. It's very, very dominant. And they're very careful about, about being inclusive, about supporting, about visualizing their heritage. And with these custom typefaces, the most interesting things happens at the beginning, to decide on the concept, on the creative direction. And we always imagine that, there's an environment where it has to fit, and we try to understand how typeface and environments relate to each other. And this is actual boardroom of NRK, of this Norwegian broadcaster, which is all made in wood, and they're using these chairs. It was quite remarkable thinking that, clearly it will probably not be Helvetica that it fits there. It has to be probably something else. And I think chairs was a good metaphor, to see that, again, it's something very functional, yet always different. What would be kind of the visual metaphor, how type can be converted. And one thing we realized that it has to be natural, has to be fairly traditional, but at the same time, these things were novel at the time. So in 1940s, this was a resolutely novel chair. For the concept, we just went back to writing. So how a pen has influence on shapes. This is like a shapes that we would call this probably a humanist model of writing. It's not constructed; it's written. And I'll show you how it looked at the end. Another thing which was interesting is, I mentioned that most of our work is across, the whole globe, working with many languages, different writing scripts. Here we did kind of the breakdown of Norwegian population. 85% of Norway speaks Norwegian as first language. They understand Norwegian, 99% of population understands, but the first language is this. What we also notice is that Norwegian has a very particular texture of text. It has to do with, if you compare it to Latin, it's a lot less harmonious in a body of text. Latin has this beautiful, circle, square repetition with almost no diagonal shapes. And it took a while to understand that the frequency of characters and breaking it down to square, round, diagonals. The more diagonal characters you have, the more disruptions you will have in the text. And it's very difficult to design kind of flowing typeface for language which has so many K's, V's, W's, and Y's. And there's nothing we can do about this. Except what we can do is that we would force it that we would, if available, choose the shapes which normally are diagonal. We don't make them diagonal, so it looks more flowing. So this would, the early sketches, papers, and this is the final presentation, which was quite a long process. Very close collaboration with the TV, internal TV team. Identity is very simple. It's a logo, color, and the font. The logo is from 1960s, and we wanted to preserve it, not change it, and just expand it, make it more flexible. And this is the new typeface. It works. Which is used everywhere, online, offline. And as it's highly functional, but needs to be distinctive as well, which is not easy to achieve distinctiveness while trying to make it just very. That these are different channels which are offered. There's one channel which in particular stood out, and it was this one, which is for the Sami population. We've dealt with Sami people before, but we've never had direct contact. Sami are the native, indigenous population of the north, primarily living in Norway, but also in Finland, a little bit in Russia, and they have their own group of languages. So they live all across north, and their language is not Norwegian. There are different flavors, different dialects of Sami languages, and we had to look into this. So even in a big corporate project, looking at minorities was important, and we made it a point that in a project of this size, which reaches entire population, is important that we support it fully. So we would make extra effort to make sure that we test it with the extra characters that we rarely designed before. So it was fun to test it. And now they have a specific channel for Sami people, which is nice. And it's apparently read and very popular. This brings me closer to another project, which is I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth, which is another people of the north. Not in the north of Europe, but in north of America, in Canada. People, there's a group of languages, not one language, but about 50 different languages which use the syllabic script. Syllabic script is this. These triangles and squares are not just abstract shapes. It's a written script. And I personally worked with this 15 years ago, I was asked to do something. And at that time, I created Fedra Sans Inuktitut, designed for one language, for Inuktitut only. But then, since then, I learned that this font works only well for one language, but these languages, there's 50 other languages used in the region. So they are all across North America, up to the north of US. There are different groups of native people who never went anywhere, but they're not able to really use their own language to represent it fully in written form. And Inuktitut is one of them, and it's well supported. But then there's another, couple of languages which are not supported properly at all. I'll explain what it means. This project was run by Kevin King. So the person which was missing in the picture, a Canadian designer, was doing, he was the main researcher and designer of the project. But of course, as I mentioned, it's a teamwork. The first question in a project like this is that you don't know what to design. Again, if you open your type editor program, and you can choose some kind of presets, and so you can use Latin one or like some kind of presets. There will not be a preset for marginalized languages. There won't be like a preset for, I don't know, what I mentioned, Santali for Ochiki or for syllabics. And even if it was, so what you could do is like go to Unicode. Unicode is the international standard for encoding languages, living and dead, to make sure that if you type a key on a computer, you get a consistent representation of that language on your phone, on your computer, across all digital environment. So even if you did, so if you say like, okay, I go to Unicode and I extract this and put it to my type editor, still it would not render things are needed because the Unicode was not properly encoded for that language. So that work is also not complete. Unicode is an ever-evolving organism that needs to be updated. And back at the time when this was done, some letters were just not, well, they were missing. They were just not encoded. So this is language sample text from Nastalik, from in the north of Canada, one of the languages which was missing about 20 different characters. So I'll explain a bit of syllabics, what it works. It's quite beautiful. It represents vowels by rotation. The rotation is very important for the script itself. And then has this series forms which are usually attached to this. So then we get consonant and vowels connected together. And then, because it's a number of different languages, there are different typographical preferences for different languages. So languages in the east or west, they look different, although they represent the same sounds. This set is supposed to represent all the languages of the supported as syllabics, and there's a number of them. But there are some preferences that like, again, people of the north, their languages were invented by French missionaries. They are written differently than the languages of the West, and we have to respect that choice. So it's the same letters, but just written in different ways. Again, by going into it, by speaking to people, we came to understand there are different traditions. We broke them down to 4 different areas. And as I mentioned before, finding information in books is very useful if available. It's not available for all languages. Canada is a rich country, so they care about the native population. So there are some books. Looking in manuscripts is important. So it's but the vital information was speaking to people, because they would show us what the current state is, what works, what doesn't work. They would point out the fact that like some letters, some sounds were just impossible to write. They would point out that some names, their own name was not possible to write, so they could never sign the name using digital versions of fonts. there was no representation of that sound available. And this happened because, back in the old days, probably these areas were too remote. So, at the time when Unicode standard was created, it was reduced to, the main language of the area and not of the marginalized ones. And we are dealing with, these remote areas on the Baffin Islands and Nunavut. The area is so remote that they have their own distinct way of speaking, dialect or language. Often the discussion between dialect and language it's often political decision rather than linguistic one. But what was important in this project was that we were able to get a really good connection with local community. And only through the connection and outreach to local community, we're able to understand what work has been made before, and to have a dialogue about what needs to be done. And this, for example, this old lady who goes by name Nilawak, she would say like, well, I actually know how these letters should be written. This is what we need. So these are, she said like, well, I invented these letters. I use them in handwriting. They just don't exist in fonts. So it's like, well, what we could do that. We can just write them, and we could propose it to Unicode, this international body. So people can design fonts who support these languages. So the current Unicode proposal was extended by 2 sets to support this language. And these Unicode proposals are possible if you can document that these letters are not new inventions, but they're actually useful. So we would have to have a proposal backed up by the local populations and be able to then do the work and design fonts. Design fonts for the first time also with cursive styles, which was quite a novelty with contrast, which was immediately very popular. And that work, the interesting thing is that work is never complete, because it is dependent on the outreach to communities. We, until now, we've been working on it for now 3 years, and the work just continues. We realize there's ongoing work, working on keyboard layouts. Now we're working with big companies, making sure that the keyboard supports the letters that we need. We're making sure that the romanization, meaning that we can transliterate these letters into Latin, works. So there's always missing components which can be improved. And it is important that we continue working with them. And the interesting thing is that people always assume, like when I talk about it, that this is kind of funded by governments. It's not. It's our work, made in our time and with our money. But we look for situations or for models which would allow us to make it sustainable. And I have to say that in this case it is sustainable, because then the Canadian governmental institutions buy these fonts and support that work, or we allocate money from other projects on this. In this case, this project was self-sufficient by itself on longer term. This was that inventor of the letters confronted with digital fonts of fonts, which was nice, to see like how it's implemented, how it's used. She was ecstatic, to see like that you can finally type her name and use it. It's really lovely to see. Like now, it's almost 2 years later. They're going to vote for the first time in their own language, which they couldn't, because they couldn't write the names of candidates before. So simple things go quite far. At that time, it was not possible really, to rely on keyboards. So we had to simulate it. So it was, using, this just presets and clicking on glyphs, because the keyboards was not available because and the fonts, they need to be fun as well. So we do all kind of styles, not just one style. They need to cover a range of voices. So again, it would not be one font, it would be a collection of fonts. And again, ongoing work. So poor Kevin, he has to keep working on this. Hector, again, is now involved in a new study, working with locals, understanding the local preferences. So it's collecting more information about shapes which are preferred by different communities. And again, we may have to go back and redress this with fonts. Getting towards the end slowly. Most ambitious work until now will come out soon. We worked on fonts for the entire Indian subcontinent. Indian subcontinent is understanding of a place that it's India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, home which is the most linguistically diverse place on earth. Again, there are possibly thousands of languages and dozens of different writing scripts. And if you wanted to have, for example, if you look at Indian banknotes, there are 22 languages in 14 scripts written, and there wouldn't be a single font which supports them all today in 21st century. So again, we find it important that there is, and so we're working on these 14 different writing scripts made in all different styles and possibilities, so they're taken seriously. This will be hopefully completed next month, so we can talk about more and the work that went to it, because it's been I think the largest project we've done until now. There's a lot to talk about. But of course, most of fonts, they can be simple, and if you want to give it a try, Indic things, Latin things, we try to make it easy. Laura mentioned that I started another company called FontStand. FontStand is a kind of a tool that allows testing or renting fonts. So rather than, previously always people ask me like, can I try a font? And I always felt like I can give it to you, but you have to be careful with this. So we made a tool that makes it very easy to test things, and or that makes it very inexpensive to use, because rather than removing glyphs from it, we reduce the duration of the use. So you can use it just for a month, and then it will cost you just a small fraction. It will cost you the price of a cappuccino. So that's nice, and beer, okay, whatever. And it's not just our fonts, like a lot of, so if you like Laura's fonts or Andreu's fonts, they're also there, because we work with many different type foundries. I'm not sure if this is most up to date. We're probably missing some foundries here, but you get the idea that it's a lot of different. And I think the nice thing is all living designers. So if you look at many of the established companies like Monotype, it's mainly people, the fonts of dead people. They've been dead for they've been dead for a very long time. So the money that goes there, it doesn't really go back to authors to make new work, but it goes to some kind of shareholders in New York, which don't care about type. And this is quite important, distinction, that the money has to go back to people. So in the same way how in music, if the music is not funded by listeners, by fans, there won't be new music. If money, in movies will not go back to movie makers, there won't be new movies. And if people will not, if they will only use fonts which people who've been dead, and money doesn't flow back, there won't be new fonts. The good thing is that if you're students, you can actually register, and we actually there's a way you can get student credits, so it's very simple to try. So give it a try. Yes, this was all I wanted to show.
Thank you, Peter. Questions for Peter?
Yeah, if this talk would be 3 years ago, it would be completely different. It would probably talk about theaters, but today it's a lot more about languages. If there are questions, I'll be happy to answer. If not, yeah, there is one.
That's a lot of really, really good work. Thank you so much for taking us through it. I wanted to know, when you're working with colloquial languages from different spaces like Devanagari and the whole Indian subcontinent, do you work with linguistics who have been studying it? Because like some of the things that you mentioned as preferences for certain sounds and alphabets being different, it's mostly been recorded by like Sanskrit linguists and Kannada, Malayalam, and Devanagari linguists. So do you work with those people while building this out, or is it based on surveys mostly?
No, we work with all sources that are possible. And type design is an interesting discipline because, you know, you get three kind of main sources of information available. So there's, you know, linguistics is a science of languages, which is important. You know, like many languages being written down how they work, but they're dependent on technology. So often, because of technological limitations, some languages suffered. For example, I don't know where you come from, but I don't know, languages of South India, Malayalam, had to go through simplification of forms because printing machines were not able to record these different variations. So there would be different orthography reforms, and then through change of technologies, reverting those reforms. So technology, linguistics, and design are interrelated. And only when you look at the areas that combine those three, then you can cover it fully. So we work with linguists, we work with technologies, we work with academics, but working with one alone is not sufficient. You need to kind of have an understanding of why things happen, where it's heading, to be up to date, and understand also how the process of colonization had effect on it because of the printing techniques which came from somewhere else, which are not designed for native languages. They were designed for Latin, expecting 26 letters, and suddenly they had to represent a number of them, and often they would just change it. So often we go back and try to look at handwriting as the first kind of critical information, how people write naturally without the effect of technology, and then to see if you can achieve something like this in digital form.
Thank you.
More questions?
My question would be, you guys are trying to understand the writing scripts and trying to make fonts for the people that use them to use it. My question would be, are you also trying to work towards the people that use the scripts, how they can design their own scripts, or give them the tools for them to design it?
Of course, in case of syllabics, creating the foundations allow more fonts to happen. So suddenly it has an impact on any future things that we're creating recipes because these are processes which are documented, and that's why most of the things which you do, the documentation is the most important thing. Not the font itself, but the documentation about the glyph set, about the interactions of glyphs. In case of indexings, will be open sourcing basic samples of fonts because it's not very easy to produce the index fonts. It's not a thing that you type one key and you go one character. There's an interaction that needs to happen, complex shaping. That there's a reordering of characters. We'll be open sourcing that information, not the font itself, but the information how it's made, so anyone can do something like this. And I think that's also, I believe, much better way because for example, Google open sources fonts. Without, but I think the recipes, how you made it, is more important than the product itself. So it's not about the product, it's more about having the knowledge about how to do anything, in any style possible, in your own style.
Thank you.
More questions?
Hi. How do you deal with microtype and the microtype aspects that you could work on the Latin alphabet, but with a different alphabet that you don't understand either? How
do we deal with? Okay. Well, people need to learn how writing works. Everyone, children need to learn, adults need to learn, and my profession means that I need to learn it multiple times, not just once, but to do it again and again every time we work a different script to have a good understanding what is happening when text is being shaped. It takes time. I think that there's no simple way. It just takes a lot of time, and that's why a lot of these projects are long-term projects. They're not produced very quickly. Collaboration with people is, can speed it up a bit, but there are no shortcuts. You just need to kind of find out more about, and that's what makes it also difficult. That some languages are poorly documented or not documented at all. Creating the primary documentation, and also, linguists don't really care about writing scripts. They care about spoken language first. So there's a lot more documentation about spoken, about sounds of languages than written forms. But it is an ongoing work, which is that makes our life kind of difficult, but also interesting. That we have to kind of permanently finding out how things work. And I think the difficult thing is not to have a misconception that just because I know how Latin works, I expect that something works in the same way. I think the kind of unlearning what we know is, before dealing with something else, is also very, very important. Because that's the hardest thing with dealing with foreign languages, that you have assumptions. I know how to do this, that's why I think someone else has to do it in a similar way. And that's usually not the case. So there are some styles of fonts which are not possible to do, for example, that we wouldn't do. We had to refuse some jobs that, I don't know, sans serif nastaliq for Pakistan is just wrong. We could do it, of course. There's technically no reason, but it would be not accepted by readers, and we know why. So we're learning about how, we're designing fonts for people, and so we need to kind of speak to those people to understand what they need.
Thanks.
More questions? All type designers are very silent today. There are many in the room. 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.